Gonna play around with this idea. It's just my corner of the world. That's all it may be. And if it's something more, it is. If it isn't, well, oof, if my pens will hold up. So it's the information sharing. Info share. What was this one? We got this one down as the known and new. So when things evolve, especially like plants and different things like that, and plus the cloning process, and it's very fascinating that a lot of the species already do this. I like this process a lot. Think about the possibilities they can unlock for anybody and everybody, to be honest. Douche. So we understand it's known is going to be light for a plant, darkness, water, what else? Temp. Mag, short for magnetic field. I'm pretty sure it's going to learn all of these things. Color, best outcome, soil. So this is the usual path of known. And again, is there a remembered? I was talking about that in the last one. Remember, shorthand, doesn't matter. And cloning, that's a possibility. However, in this new information passing off, or remembered, there's this knowledge of cloning, and not just clone, but how to clone, when to clone. And whether this is remembered and it was already cloning before we reached this known process, but then why did it forget? Then that would say that evolution can go backwards. But there again, there's a trigger. Is it when to clone? Would be the known. If it is known, it wouldn't be new, but it would know when. And when not to. But there again, that wouldn't make much sense either. Cloning seems like new information. Now, when messing around with this graph over here is where I was doing it first. How to clone. There's a little bit more knowing in that. New, the unknown. What is new? Bees. And what they like and are attracted to. That's learning. Or evolving, some might say. People, food, nutrients. Did we evolve to absorb these nutrients? Well, no, pretty much. We're meat eaters, we would say. But that then starts producing a food that highly favors our survival. And if we came out of the water, we could have been hunting in a pretty much a cycle there, but be reliant on nature as a side note, as opposed to a main note. And also bees too. So evolving is learning, and now what could be the benefit? At the end of the day, it also understands how to keep us safe, and whether directly or indirectly. Pollen. Could you imagine that going to another planet? You've not experienced any of the plants or foliage that's there, assuming that they have it, and you go down. Do you think that's going to start making you itch? Irritate your eyes? That's very potent, isn't it? It'd be like cutting an onion. And that's just by being in it. And as soon as it crushes, it starts releasing chemicals that you are not used to, and therefore, if you were not used to it, you haven't learned it, and it hasn't learned you. It's a very interesting process. So it would repel you. Interesting. Bees, in order to spread pollen. This would be new information. And slowly but surely, if it's still evolving and we're in this learning process, do you think nature, and if we take a look at some of the, after leaching, the acorn is the one that is close to meat. Close. So eventually it could reach that way. Yeah, it can give you a bit of fat. If processed correctly. So that's a level of learning. That's a learning your anatomy, which is an interesting process. Anyway, so it turns off this and it more focuses on cloning, but still produces the flower. Whether it keeps the flower is another thing. But I was growing a particular plant, and maybe because it had its genes altered, it stopped flowering and it just started growing berries. Now maybe there were some flowers on there, just too small and I didn't see it. But it began growing with the berries on it. Now it is a genetically modified plant, blackberry. So whether that is a default in that or not, whether it could call that genetically modified, it's been engineered. I know that much. So that didn't flower. To begin with, it did. But then when it was brought inside, it began to grow and flower, which I found fascinating. There was two contrasts with it. And then I wonder if introduced to bees, whether there would be a difference in the plant's behavior. Whether one turned off in this ratio learns to grow, if was introduced with bees, would it change and adapt to create flowers, which would then put energy into attracting more bees? That would be interesting. So that's a seeing without actually seeing, and there's also second sight, I'd call it, which is cloning, the ability to clone. And it's usually female. I'm not saying it's impossible for male, but from what I understand, it's usually female. Which is quite fascinating. And then learning how to do that and following on, where it might not be cloning, and then it starts cloning, and then all of the clones that are moved to separate pots begin also cloning at a much faster ratio. So knowing when to turn that on. It's still flowering and still producing a crop, although will that continue? That's another question entirely. Under the likeliness, and would that cause it to flower more though? That's another question. Would it flower more? And then it's about getting into that chain. And if you could teach one directly something new, a different environment, would it affect the clone? Would it pass that information down? And then that shows you engineered cloning at will, depending on the environment, clone to a certain type of environment, which is much more faster because you're in real time. Push out another clone, the soil begins to change pH, and the next clone passes on that information. And is it now learning to pass it through this channel as opposed to this one, and keeps this one? Because it still holds this, but now how does it utilize that data? Reproduction usually, and over a longer period of time. But this information would be faster. So if it can have 6 clones a season, being in a year, and if the soil changes, let's say there's 1 per month, and there is a soil change each month, can this keep the plant adapting faster by making each clone ready for the next soil type, which seems a lot more quicker than the reproduce, and it means that your variable always stays. So if we were to wrap this into one bowl, because overall is what it is, just divide it into multiple, may the best version stay on. And if it's in this way of the best version stays on, if this one dies because of the change of soil, this one dies because of the soil pH changes, can't sustain life. All of its rest of its clones that are then adapting very fast from a new palette, a more controlled palette, means that in the likelihood if it does reproduce and expands towards a male via this process of moving, hardiness, then essentially the whole plant survives. Which I think is better, rather than waiting for reproduce. Your life is then to hold on and expand slowly. Meaning that you get an adjustment with the times. Which is interesting. So, and it's more energy is being gained. That's why the bulbs get very quick, very fast, because they don't shut down. And I'm sure they have better months indoors, especially while being warm. But it guarantees to always be open. Living. Now, is it adapting to the star? Yes, it seems to understand the star's ratio. Blue light, red light. It seems to favor these, and slight alteration in the coloration of the plant. But even still, most of the year it's working optimal. And therefore there's a lot of energy being utilized for growth. So it gets a lot bigger. Massive, in fact. And then there's a stabilization happen, I think, with the clones is what's going on in that. So it's almost like the overall clone. It still pushes some out. Now with this extra energy, what is it doing with it? Well, we know what happened to us when we stayed awake during the winter, so we were no longer hibernating. Well, the need to hibernate. We were more enclosed, and life hindered every time there was a really cold season. It wasn't until getting adjusted with the fires and everything else, and enclosure, that they then became more better, more energized in the winter. The summer still went on, but inside. And the more and more you're awake and the more advanced and awake you are during the winter, you have a lot of energy. And for humans, that journey looks like destruction or creation or transformation. If you can only do half the stuff because winter makes you a little bit docile, the waiting time, a little bit lethargic, a bit more indoors, less burny, whatever it may be, and there isn't much food about, it slows you all right down. But it also slows down the transformation ratio. But now you're awake so much, and not just awake, but active, running in the winter. There's more demand on the overall atmosphere, but we live in a season. There's mainly seasonal plants. That's the transition after the Ice Age. Go from pine to more seasonal. I guess the problem with that is seasonal growth, therefore seasonal with plankton and anything else that's causing oxygen, only happens for a few months of the year. And now you're awake longer, utilizing more resource. That will start to catch you out a little bit unless you do something, which is to bring nature in more than is being done. Underground farms, these are great, above ground farms, whatever it may be, to exchange the gases. Because think what nature could do, and it does have a knock-on effect. It's a staggered approach. But if you had nature open all year, that would be giving and taking to the world, to your air, to your cleanliness of your air quality, the sweating of moisture control. The purification process as well, that increases. Plants often, when they draw moisture to their roots, they are purifying the water. It's an interesting process. Knocks things out and draws things in. It gains nutrients. Just water's basic function is to pull things apart and attract things. The soup binding. Best of both worlds. And when it freezes, it breaks things down as well. It creates a lot of nutrients. And therefore it can leave crystal deposits, and once this drinks it, it releases a purified version into the atmosphere, into the environment. But only for half the year. And we're awake 12 months in a year. And we are over demanding what the areas are supplying. So our supply and demand. Anyway, in this sort of process, we're given this essentially more energy. And look at what we can do with that more energy. Shit me, we can build all year round. Nothing rests. All of our stuff continues to breathe, but nothing rests in that life. But in nature, it sort of takes the on, off. And we're kind of turned on humanity and just kept going. Everything is CO2 based. Whereas nature is very much dip and snooze, and it has a snooze and a wake. But our demand is constant. So, fascinating. So it's going to change things. Things are going to evolve. Sure it is, because we're giving nature its optimal ratio. It's interesting, really. Look at what it can do with that energy. And with that excess energy, I think it then triggers cloning. Like something awakens in it. And then essentially the whole bulb as one survives. That's interesting. There are also plants. Trees can do this. Certain trees you can. Sometimes it diminishes. But this version of cloning here, cool. No, there's no diminishment in that. It seems to be getting faster and stronger. And in some things, it diminishes out. I don't know, pine, is it? Maybe it does if the pine tree is not old. Maybe it needs to be quite old and then trip it and continue on that way. Will it be stronger? Who knows? Perhaps it's just not cut out to evolve this way and the next stuff is. Pendulous sedge as well. Any types of enclosed farming, who knows? We didn't get this stuff to last all year, but what it does for water purification is quite good. It's not the greatest, but still, you could get some reeds in there as well. That would also grow very happy and with the pendulous sedge, probably at the same time. Again, whatever this can get turned into, who knows, but this can definitely be a food source, and all of these things will purify water, especially when they leave it, running inside an enclosed environment. So it should evaporate quite a bit in that process, collect it, and it should purify the water, usually in boggy areas. Depends on what you use the reed for, and its head, cattail. But pendulous sedge doesn't suffer terribly much with ergot, so it is said. And this can make a food source. Whether any good or not, who knows, but a bit more natural. It's always open, and there again, could you adjust a small type of farm for a crop that is made in this and it's just left to go? If this awakens over the course of a full 12 months, perhaps it just slows down for the winter. But imagine enclosing it. So essentially it's like taking this plant in and keeping it indoors. It opens out and it stays living for many, many years. So you do the same with this. So it'll convert a lot of gases. Hopefully it's convert a lot of gases, and it'll also supply some more food. And I'm wondering if it will flower twice a year, maybe even 3 times. After a few cycles of it getting established with that, and I wonder what happens to the reed as well. And filter a lot of water in the process. And sustain a food with farming that is pretty simple, really, isn't it? That would be simpler farming. Would you need to sow your seeds? Not really. Just harvesting might be a bit tricky, but even still, it could be a modernized version of farming. Not the best in the world, but especially for purification on water, converting gases throughout the year. It's just a small generator that keeps this going, and even if it was built in glass bricks and had a nice warming effect to it, who knows? It doesn't need to be heated up much. We often think that it needs loads of heat. No, not in the winter. It needs less than humans. But still, the growth and what you make up for that in harvest is massive. Therefore, does that actually serve a benefit? Who knows? But the thing is, it will evolve. I wonder what that will evolve into. And then it'll be able to grow largely. This stuff almost appears to clone in itself. Feed all year round, maybe. If it gets up to 3 on the cycle, I think it could do it. It's got enough energy to do so. There again, that's all about this. I'm just digging into this. I don't know whether I'll upload this or not. I'm just thinking out the box with this sort of stuff. Seeing if anything more jumps at me. Temperature is definitely something. So there's clearly balanced temperature, something new. It's never experienced that before, not since point A to point B. Now, is this because it's long-term prediction of what? The sun? Solar system? It's clearly, if we go on this particular journey, this is going to be the change following this protocol, because you're getting ready for something along that lines or that nature, and therefore this stuff is remembered, which is known, and you're on the journey to create the new, which is evolving, nothing more than that. But that evolving process always points to eternal life, which is quite fascinating in its own right, the process, either or. So, Do these clones, is it already remembering? It's already known, but it's chose to hold it back until a time of something triggers it. But then to put that energy and effort into that, that must be following a star process. But how does this know about the star? Therefore, it must be mapping it, learning it. And if it is, it's predicting it. And then if it's predicting that and it's putting a lot of effort and energy into that, then we'll see a reduction of pine trees, I think. Pine will begin to phase out. Interesting. And then it's gone to leaves that drop, which is an evolving layer from the pine, isn't it? Perhaps it just wasn't worth keeping open under those temperatures. Interesting. But if you do get the temperatures right, which one way you can look at it, or it's the other way you can look at it, you can drop your leaves, which makes them better for repair. Who knows if it's that repairing? But just in case it gets hot, pine doesn't work well. Perhaps these new style of leaves do. More sweaty, more to leave, more moisture transition. And then if it does go tempered temperature, so if we say 10, then it can hold on to the leaves all the same. And therefore, the evolution of nature from pine has evolved into the current trees we know, birch, willow, all of these, in order to get ready for some sort of outcome that already prepares it for that. Yeah, it's moved away from being able to cope with freezing and into heating. So I wonder if pine is better when it's cold. The next ones have evolved for warm. Warmer. Which could balance in an optimal ratio to be a clonable conditions, which is eternal life. It's close to whatever is supporting it. So there again, there's a lot of predictions here just from a life form such as nature. So simple, isn't it? But it seems to be putting a lot of eggs in its basket for this one. Which would make it quite adapt to that environment. Interesting. And there again, is it passing new information or known? But there again, how could it possibly know unless it's evolved with life forms being us? We all rely on it. Is that accidental or is that deliberate? You ask these questions, maybe you don't, but I like these questions. Is that deliberate and for the plant's advantage that we have to take it with? Well, that would be interesting. And there again, doesn't plants interfere with your brains? That sounds really weird to say that, doesn't it? But everything you eat, your body responds to it. So mushrooms, for example. So with being able to develop a brain via nutrients, It seems silly, doesn't it? But you need a good amount of nutrients in order for brain development, which makes you quite reliant on a plant for that. I don't think you can get all of that brain development from just eating meat alone. And the meat that you eat relies solely on this process being nature. Now, has nature, with its long-term calculations, because this is what it looks like to me, we evolved with it to need it, but yet even our food being meat, assume you eat meat, also relies this stuff. Relies on it heavily. So therefore, we rely on it. And brain development, nutrition. That would be interesting. Purification. We rely on this a lot more than meets the eye. Very long-term prediction, isn't it? Then, if you are intelligent enough, you would take this. You would understand this. And there again, money has been created from food. That's crazy, isn't it? Well, it's literally the top of the food chain, if it is the food chain. Because indirectly, without this meat, we go over to these other products, but they still rely on plant. And whether organically or not, it would still rely on all of this nutrition process as opposed to chemical. Fascinating. So when two life forms work together, being plants and humans, and it only needs one variable to really work with that and get the concept to pick it up. Not one human, but all of humanity to pick up on that. And it also feeds you, and it keeps your gases and water quite at a good balance. And therefore you would very early on learn that it becomes sacred naturally, I suppose, not because of any religion or anything else, but just with that understanding. You can see how they get very sacred. Depends which way you come at it, which angle. And therefore it is your food. Alcohol, drink, nutrition, animal feed. Wow. And there again, how is intelligence really perceived? Are you looking at it or are you not looking at it? Are you looking at it as being just a plant? Just something so simple that we just evolved together? Or is there more purpose behind it? And does it have a purpose? Has it ensured that we take it in this way? That's interesting. And then version 2, if we do something for it, what could that do for humans? Well, this is producing a lot of oxygen. We like that. That's good, apparently. It also cleans water via filtering. We also like that too. I mean, water and food is a massive And a purification of these is highly helpful. Can it learn to keep the soil balanced? Oof. And does it guarantee that it lives on in this optimal ratio? And then if it could teach you how to clone, I mean, that would be an interesting thing. And then does all of this become a pattern? Or is there a path that the more you expand it, what if, we're going to sound crazy for saying it, but you know what? I'm going down it because it's just nothing more than thinking out of the box, throwing it away. Let's just make a gap here. What if it was nature that pulled us out of the water? I mean, it sounds bizarre, doesn't it? Until you really have a go with it. We see the way that dolphins, whales crash onto the shore, come in for a bit, and then skim off out of it. The more they do that, the more their body is learning. And eventually you can see how things, yes, can leave the ocean, that's for sure. But it would need a food supply, and it would get it immediately from nature. And its food will adapt to eat this food, which is lured from the nature. And let's say if humans in the beginning, and if you believe such a thing, if you were in the ocean and you have evolved to be land creatures from that process, perhaps some of this chewy stuff that you started eating to start with, whatever it may have been, if you came from the ocean, this would have been really nice, perhaps. A good amount of food in your everyday, and with a rising and falling tide. But it just dangled in at the edge, and as the tide goes out, you'd probably learn to jump at it, and then either find a pull to get into and keep coming out of there, pushing the boundary each time, before eventually that information was fed back into the stream, which is evolving DNA, to then be able to eat this food out of here. And while eating that, if there were anything else feeding in this particular way of leaving the oceans and nature expanded towards the edges, whatever, rivers, could be whatever, you begin to feed on it. And anything else that's feeding in on that too, well, you just had some fish and chips. So you never really eat anything purely vegetarian, never really. Well, it could be veggie. But a little bit of protein thrown in for good measure. And then the evolving process began. I mean, it would seem weird, how did trees see? But if it could see what was in the water and grew to it, and via something eating at it, learnt a lot from it. And then began to process, or you could put religion here if you wanted to. Yeah, began to eat into the... Wow, what a process. Sorry, I'm just journeying off again. So, you come from the sea, the ocean, a river, I don't really care which it is. And you evolved, and everything that left also evolved on this stuff. And meat. And therefore, has it had a role in shaping? Which most things want to dominate and control, I think, is probably the way. And therefore, these nutrients that shape your mind, and they shape your reality. That's an interesting thing. In order for you to find its optimal, and then you take nature with you. So, if it went this way, now this will be a weird thing, you could then plaster it against evolution, okay? Assuming that it went this way. Now, it did have this little devious little plan. That would be its behavior, right? Version number crazy. Well, a strange thing would happen if you started to do it again and it had good intentions. And once again, you trigger something, but perhaps it doesn't see, but it feels in a different way that we see, feel. It's still existing and passing on information on this new database. What happens if we start putting this into massive farms elsewhere? Will it evolve again to do more with better nutrients? Will it unlock anything? Because that's how it's expected to change. And then did it evolve us with the food for the brain development? Very important. Plays a good role in function. Keeps us out of the water. Interesting. So we understand transition of pressure. What could a life form right on your own doorstep? Could it have had a plan in shaping life? And you have to ask that. We can shape it, so we are shaping other life forms. We shape this. It's interesting, isn't it? But can it shape you? Just in a different way. And transforms the environment to get it what it wants, which we do too, don't we? Then we're right to assume that life does this in general. And what's a guarantee, right? It's to bind, isn't it? It's to bind life forms together. Then what would that calculation look like? Well, if you did it with multiple life forms, then variations mean that you will get a desired outcome, more to shape. Therefore, more variables, more outcome. Interesting. Into helping you leave, knowing that you might not be able to do that yourself. Now that seems very, very large, right? But isn't that what parasitic life does? And we are a collection of this, even in ourselves. When you think about what accumulates together to form a person, a collection. Wow. Wow, wow, wow. Whether you like being that from that awareness, who knows? Maybe it does. It all holds together for X amount of years. If it all survives and is able to be cloned, potentially, you can live forever. And be able to engineer it. Highly probable, because it's already possible. It's already happening with other species. That's already in evolution's database. Be an impact. So therefore, perhaps, and then if we were unlocked that at this capacity, well, does it unlock more protection? More life forms come together. Can it support more life? Which then requires gases. I mean, it's a very different way of existing. It's come a long way from the pine. I think pine needs colder. This one is reaching balance. And there again, if there are any transitions that happen, well, that's how they're going to evolve. Which is quite interesting, to be honest, that it's already prepared that. is it a possibility? There's another one. Is it going to trend this way, or is something going to happen where we take it in our own hands and begin to evolve a different world? And that could be the outcome. Maybe, maybe not. And then if you begin to see it, where these ones have been and had their foot in the door, which is engineered cloning, that's fascinating. To be able to engineer that in real time for the best possible outcome from a new database that it seems to be collecting, and how many years does that improve? Then when we see it starting to engineer cloning of a past, it would seem very bizarre, wouldn't it? But they've already got their foot in the door of cloning. What's their next step? Possible next step? Engineer. Can it start going backwards in the ones that created it in order to understand it going forwards? Now that would be a bizarre thing. And can it pass down cloning? And is it to garner knowledge by going backwards? Again, which would fit in with the universal theme, star and black hole. Oh, interesting. And that is its journey backwards. Everything swears if it had more time, it would know. Einstein said it. I think he knew on some of his theories on his deathbed, he knew he was running out of time, which must be a bizarre and very realistic thing to say. But I think what he meant was he wouldn't have enough time to complete it. And then you ask the question, if this was Einstein in growth in humans, and he could live 400 years, just imagine that, but be only 6 months. And be able to pass down that information. And at 400 years, this one passes, but 406 months. Look at that. Timeline continues, and this one then becomes 400 years and 6 months old. My word. What could you do with more of that time? Especially being young. Plants are doing this right before your very eyes. I mean, probably not perfect, but good enough. Some worm can do it. I can't remember what it's called now. And again, this fish, I've got to look more into that. What would you think up? Well, that would be a growing theory, a work in progress. And then just quickly calculating how old a certain cloning specimen is going on for. You apply that to a human. Just take anyone, Tesla or Einstein, and you expand that into their knowledge of being able to rejuvenate. Concentrated clones, because there is the second part, that if it's around you long enough, and I'm pretty sure your clone would find you probably useful. Oh yeah, there's also in the death process of these, that when they die, it seems to feed the one closest to it. That's interesting. It seems to bulk up. So would that be engineered death? That's what I asked, another question, that when one of the bulb begins to not work, or it doesn't just really doesn't work, it begins rotting down, the ones closest to it begin to puff up. That's a weird thing, man. So I then ask a question of whether that is engineered to give the best maximum amount of nutrients to the one before, which would then be remembered. And keep evolving with this process. And there you are, plants are already doing this, but could you imagine if they started going backwards and started picking back from their bloodline that led them to where they're at? Looking for a good mix, match, something learned through the life, the meaning of it. Why? What is this? Is it there? That would be an interesting thing. Anyway, that's if it would. It might do that. Who knows? What could you do if you gave it more time? Let's say if you could take up this plant and then accelerate it into the future. So let's say you keep it for 1.5 million years. Let's say billion. Let's say 1,000. Let's say one cycle. What if you kept this for a cycle? What would it transpire into if it's already cloning? What would that look like? X amount of years from now, many of them. If it keeps going with this trend, where's it headed? Sometimes it's not so easy to do it with humans, is it? Because we're all so bloody different with our jumble, our mind databases. But when we look at nature, it gives you a bit more of a clear, it seems to have a clearer path than me. It seems to know something. But what is that knowing? And then is it remembered? What does it see? How does it know to do this? Well, it's just because that's the way life is. Yes. Why? Does that mean it's possible? Well then, yes, absolutely. Perhaps not. Until you bring it into your awareness and look at it and actually pay attention to this process. I think it begins to unlock things. Maybe. If we wake it up, does it unlock winter? Yes. If you bring it in, does it create more oxygen for you to have a better winter? Yes. If you selflessly bring it near the old times and closer to a fire, did it do anything? I'm sure it did. Even still, we offer it warmth and it can make do with the light. And if it's open during the winter, we can act and do what we need to do in the winter too, and therefore it will support that, as opposed to us constantly awake, and these things are seasonal. If these things were awake with us, it would show that we would have more time to transform. This has more time to transform, to work things out. And interesting. Where's it heading in 1 billion years? And what could it do with that much time? I think it would go back through its bloodline. And if it is, in the future, see that. I think that would be an obvious thing. Crazy, isn't it? Like it looks so obvious. Of course it's going that way. I wonder what the mindsets would be of the people then. If the bloodline starts looking backwards in certain plants, that's an interesting trigger. And then if you see it, does it change how you are as a species? If it can do it, well, what about us? Now I see it, now I know it. How does that shape the mind? Interesting. Well, anyway, I'm going to leave this one here. It's just a scrambled thought, just trying to process it and make sense of it, but it can be a number of ways. You can go at this from a religious sense. You can go at it from a scientific sense. You can hit this with any sense you want. It gives you a slightly different outcome, but still a heading, a direction. For now, it's just chaos wanting to make sense. So cloning is already possible. Interesting. And being able to see it, then does it make you look for it in your own species? And then do you want to try and do that? Which Egyptians were already doing that, weren't they? Mummification. I'll come back. Eternal living. Bloody hell.